Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains controversial. And today, we're going to discuss, Donald Trump. Well, not him directly, just a specific business that he was highly involved in. I just want to preface this whole thing with the fact that this particular video is not going to have any kind of political leanings. I deal in facts here, strictly in facts, regarding history. I am not dealing with any kind of left versus right versus left political nonsense, because I recognize fully that Donald Trump is a very, very, very controversial figure, especially in today's climate. But we're talking about something that happened decades ago involving one of his companies, rather specifically the company itself. And I just want to clear the air and explain that I myself am not going to have any biases regarding how I tell this story. I'm just going to tell you exactly how it went. And even though I say this, I am 100% confident in the notion that the comment section will be an utter disaster, because I know that my following is very, very one side or the other when it comes to your political opinions. But I am not going to have any of those today, just business talk. This is the story of the Trump Shuttle. The Trump Shuttle. The heck is a Trump Shuttle? Is it a bus service? Well, no. Trump Shuttle Inc. was an airline that was owned by Donald Trump from 1989 to 1992. Given the name, you probably recognize that this is an air shuttle, which is kind of a vague term when it comes to airline services, but generally the rule when it comes to an air shuttle is that they specialize in very, very, very short regional flights, almost hops in certain areas. The flights themselves are usually no longer than 45 minutes, and use very small planes, and are generally handled in a way that makes the flight as low cost for the airline as possible, but is also low cost for the consumer as a result. Trump didn't actually start this company technically, he just renamed a pre-existing service. See, in the late 1980s, both Eastern Air Lines as well as Pan American World Airways were operating air shuttle services in the northeastern area of the United States. They were actually highly profitable for both of them, and this was very important because both airlines were struggling overall. The shuttle services they were operating were one of the few areas they had that was even generating any kind of profit for them. Eastern in particular's finances was getting even worse during that time, and the carrier was starting to sell its routes, as well as its aircraft. But because the shuttle service was actually more profitable, it reorganized that into a separate company that was headed by a man named Bruce Nobles. And the plan was to sell it to raise some extra capital for themselves. The president of Eastern, Frank Lorenzo, actually met Donald Trump at a party at Trump's Plaza Hotel in New York City. They got along well, and of course, Trump managed to cut a deal with Lorenzo to buy the shuttle element of the airline for $365 million. Now, opinions are very, very, very all over the place when it comes to whether or not Trump overpaid for this particular sale, but two factors here. A, it was profitable, and he knew that going in. B, if the airline continued that trend, the initial sale cost could be justified, even though it did exceed the projected cost to start up a similar airline. Trump actually might have saved money if he had just bought new planes and everything that goes with that all on his own, but instead he bought, used planes and the facilities that they flew to. But they were pre-existing and pre-established, so the company wouldn't necessarily have to fight to make themselves known, since people were already using them anyway. Trump would now just be the new owner. The fleet was small, 17 Boeing 727s, which were older planes by that point, and they in themselves were not very large, but this was a shuttle service, so they were perfect for those particular duties. He also got the right to put his name on the company, as well as the airplanes, thus of course creating Trump Shuttle. Contrary to popular belief, this was not Trump's first foray into the air shuttle market. It was just his first foray into airplanes. In March of 1988, he acquired 3 Sikorsky S-61s that originally belonged to Resorts International Airlines, or RIA. They were used to shuttle wealthy individuals to his casino, Resorts Casino Hotel, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. But while the helicopter service worked well for casino high rollers in terms of getting them directly to where they wanted to go gamble and spend even more money, a shuttle service didn't work that way, and airplanes were not the same as helicopters. Trump had no experience when it came to managing an airline, which, yeah, it's still a business, but there are certain elements of a travel service that are a lot different than what Trump was particularly used to. Recognize for a second that Donald Trump, regardless of what you think of him, is not Howard Hughes. Yes, they were both incredibly wealthy business magnates, but Hughes had a background when it came to aeronautics and was a genius when it came to engineering things that flew. Trump had no experience when it came to any of that, so him managing an air service already was kind of a questionable decision, but if he were to, say, pay other people who knew how to do this in order to do it for him, it would probably be fine. That's not exactly what he wound up doing, though. Prior to his acquisition of the airline, Eastern had been running the business as a strictly no-frills operation for business travelers. No-frills is kind of business slang that refers to a service or product that does not have any non-essential features, specifically to keep the price low. So there's no extravagance, no extra catering, no free gift just for using it, nothing like that. It's strictly, it takes you from here and goes you to here. That is what you're paying for, that is what you're getting. We'll get you there safely, but nothing extra. For a shuttle service, this is kind of necessary. Planes are pretty expensive. And because of that, it gets to a point where, for a short trip, well, people would rather spend the extra time driving or taking a bus or a train than paying way too much to fly. So in order to keep the cost as minimal as possible, Eastern had to operate it as a no-frills service. But this is Donald Trump, and he doesn't do that at all. The man loves luxury, an overabundance of it, quite frankly, and he loves showing off. So he did not continue the no-frills idea. Oh no, not even a little bit. But before we get to that, understand that the deal was kind of agreed on in October of 1988, but Trump would have to wait nearly a year, June 1989, in order to get a hold of the company in the first place. This is because right after they made the deal with Trump, Eastern filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. This was bad for the sale because with them doing it and it being announced, a lot of passengers switched from them entirely to the competing Pan Am shuttle instead. As a result, the Eastern shuttle was suddenly losing money when Trump initially made the arrangement. They were in the black. They were making a profit. Now they weren't. And Trump, annoyed by this, understandably so, attempted to use that to negotiate a lower price and to acquire additional aircraft from Eastern, to not really that much success. The deal was kind of solidified already. During this time, America West Airlines actually submitted a more attractive competing offer. That was on May 10th, but their financing was not in place, so the deal fell flat, and Trump's offer was approved by the bankruptcy court in May of 1989, and he received the airline in June. It was financed through a loan from a syndicate of banks that was led by Citibank. He officially launched the Trump Shuttle operation on June 8th, 1989. Bruce Nobles was still with the company, and was the one that Trump considered his hands-on, in-charge kind of guy. And at first things seemed alright. By the end of August, mostly due to Trump's bragging about the new airline and promoting it, which he is very good at, they had a strong market share of at least 40%. Trump claimed 50, but it's hard to say exactly how true that was, but it was pretty high. But like I said, Trump was not interested in running a no-frills operation. After all, he was calling it Trump Shuttle. This was his service. His name was on it, and he expected the interior, as well as the service itself, to reflect his name. People expected luxury when they saw the name Trump, so he pushed to make the new shuttle just that, a high-end service, as well as a marketing vehicle for his own name. The idea was to appeal to the same demographic that his helicopters appealed to, basically rich people who could afford a higher price ticket in exchange for the lap of luxury. And to his credit, he did not skimp when it came to supplying that exact thing. In addition to repainting all the aircraft in white, with his name emblazoned on the side, the interiors were completely redecorated with features like maple wood veneer, chrome seat belts, as well as gold-colored lavatory fixtures with fake marble sinks. He wanted to use real marble, but real marble is extremely heavy, and all these modifications made the aircrafts a lot heavier. So they had to go with fox marble instead to lighten the load a bit. They also had fancy new carpeting, too. Basically, everything about them was redone to make them as fancy as possible. And yeah, they were. They offered free drinks just like Trump's casinos, as well as in-flight meals. And I mean good in-flight meals, like Caesar salad and steak. The flight attendants were also given new uniforms, too. And not everything the flights offered was necessarily just for show. I mean, yeah, they were given free meals, free really good meals, not just a packet of peanuts, and that was already pretty nice. But Trump was interested in adopting new advanced technologies, which is a bit more in line with what a company should be doing. They were one of the first to introduce passenger self-service check-in hoists at LaGuardia, where they were based at. And they partnered with a new startup firm known as Lapstop, which, okay, this is gonna sound weird when I say it, but I swear I'm not making it up. It was a laptop computer rental service. Now, why the heck would you want to do that? Well, keep in mind, laptops were, well, very new back then. It was the late 80s, early 90s, and many businessmen, even if they could afford a ticket on this flight, couldn't necessarily justify purchasing one of those. They didn't need it, but it was helpful. So the idea was to rent them for a period of time and let them do some work on the go, and then, well, give it back. Trump was actually getting paid by them, and they were getting paid by the passengers. On top of that, they were an early adopter of the GTE Airphone, which is an in-flight telephone system, not unlike the Amtrak phone that I discussed a while back. Again, this is not something that is really used nowadays because we have cell phones. Everyone has one of those. But back then, not everyone did, so it was a good idea to implement that too. But with all this came a very high cost. They spent millions on refurbishing these planes, on top of the millions Trump had spent to purchase it in the first place, and the millions he then spent on advertising his new airline in order to compete with Pan Am, who were in turn spending millions on advertising back against Trump. Trump often sniped at Pan Am for their lack of safety and things of that nature, and emphasized how prompt his service would be. They would never be late and things of that nature, which are things you absolutely do not say when you're advertising an airline. I know it sounds like if you're a travel service, you want to make sure that you advertise the fact that you're always on time, but first of all, in the modern day, if an airline tells you they're always on time, they are lying to you. They don't do that. They literally can't, because an airplane doesn't work the same as a ground vehicle. Unlike almost any land-based vehicle, a plane is much more inhibited by bad weather. It's considered too dangerous, and that's exactly what happened to their first flight on June 8th, 1989. It was held up for 45 minutes. After Trump had bragged about how they would be punctual all the time. But again, it had nothing to do with his service necessarily, it was because of bad weather. But because Trump had not been able to not shut his mouth about this particular thing, it kind of tainted their public image. A much more grievous and dangerous issue happened on August 11th, 1989, when one of the 727's nose gear did not come down, which is kind of a problem since they had to land. The flight was on its way from LaGuardia to Boston and had to circle around the airport for nearly an hour, dumping fuel over the ocean, as well as flying ridiculous maneuvers, trying to shake the nose gear loose, but nothing worked. As a result, the flight had to make a very, very dangerous landing without the nose gear. But no one was hurt. In fact, it was frankly a perfect landing given the situation. Captain Robert Smith was at the time 47 and an ex-Navy pilot. He had flown for Eastern Air Lines for 19 years before he worked under the Trump Shuttle. Upon landing, he did exactly what he should have done, which is hold the nose of the aircraft up for as long as reasonably possible before finally putting it down, as gently as possible, and he totally pulled it off. There were no injuries, and Trump called it the most beautiful landing you've ever seen. Maybe a more beautiful landing would have been one where the nose gear was down and nobody was panicked, but the point was, Captain Smith did an amazing job, and Trump praised him for it, so fair enough. The incident looked bad again for Trump Shuttle, but to their defense again, this had nothing to do with them. It actually was Eastern Airlines' fault. The following investigation showed that the reason the gear hadn't come down was due to an error made by their maintenance crews prior to the sale. So this had less to do with Trump's management style and his staff, and more to do with Eastern staff and Trump choosing to buy a bunch of used airplanes. The 727s were old, and that was one of the big problems the shuttle was running into. Because they were old, they were just more expensive to use. They used more fuel, they were more expensive to maintain, etc. On top of that, the ridiculous amount of opulence that had been put inside them was, well, heavy, and was making managing them a lot more difficult. They were more expensive to clean, flight attendants had trouble moving the drink carts across the new carpeting, which, in response to this complaint, Trump told them to push harder, so, you know, and they had spent millions to do it in the first place. If they had kept the planes pretty much the same, maybe updated them a little bit, they wouldn't have spent so much of their money from the get-go. And the real issue was, despite actually being an extremely pleasant experience based off of those who flew on it, even the journalists who did, the flights were too short. This was a shuttle service, not a transcontinental one, or a transoceanic for that matter. These flights only lasted about 45 minutes tops, like I said, and as a result, you had pretty much no time to actually, enjoy the luxury that they were offering. One journalist said she'd barely finished her Caesar salad or her glass of Chardonnay before the prepare for landing announcement came on. And that was really the biggest issue. Yeah, they were fancy and offered a very unique type of service, but not for long enough to justify it. That same journalist, who worked for CN Traveler, Barbara Peterson, described the service as classy, but it was sort of like having the 21 Club cater a Greyhound bus trip. Like, yeah, it was really nice, but why? What for? You weren't on it long enough to appreciate it. If Trump's airline had been a transcontinental service, if the flights had lasted multiple hours, the fanciness of it all would have actually made a lot of sense, and they might have done a lot better. But because the service didn't last long enough, it just seemed like a complete waste of money. Why would you pay extra to go in style when your going in style was going to last less than an hour? You might as well take the cheaper trip on Pan Am for that, and even they weren't doing well because of an economic recession, as well as the fact that in 1990, Operation Desert Storm had taken place, and the cost of jet fuel doubled. This was a terrible situation for all airlines, and because of the economic situation, many people just weren't traveling, at least not on planes. So not only were they paying extra for fuel, but they also just didn't have that many passengers, especially not on short regional services that could be taken just as easily on a train or even just renting a car. And hyping up a new service only lasts so long. It's true, they had a decent market share at first because of Trump's ability to advertise, but that barely lasted them a year, and even with the hype, they were never profitable. Trump himself blamed Nobles, who he got rid of in June of 1990.
You're fired.
And he wanted to form a new strategy. He told the media at the time that the shuttle was an aesthetic success, which is debatably true. Everyone appreciated the aesthetic of it. But he wanted to make it a financial success, and he was upset with the people running it. The new management team Trump put in place planned to offer leisure services to Mexico, the Caribbean, as well as Atlantic City, which was actually, to be fair, a very good idea, because those would be much longer flights, and people could actually enjoy the exclusive services that Trump Shuttle was offering. But it was too late for this. In September of 1990, they missed a $1.1 million interest payment to their creditors. Trump's other business ventures at the time weren't doing well, again due to the poor economic status things. Many people weren't spending money at casinos anymore because they didn't have the money to blow. And in order to avoid a personal bankruptcy, he was forced to cede control over several businesses to his bankers in June of 1990. Prior to the default in September, Trump had personally guaranteed $135 million of the shuttle's debt. But when that happened, Citibank initially made arrangements for Northwest Airlines to take control of the shuttle in exchange for relieving Trump's personal liability. This may seem like a strange decision because, well, Trump owed them money. Why would they bail him out of that? It was because of the way the loan was exchanged. See, Trump had spent mostly the bank's money on this venture. And yeah, he was liable, but he was a powerful figure and the bank knew it. He had enough assets in order to afford a lengthy, drawn-out lawsuit, and Citi just didn't feel like dealing with it. And with the shuttle failing, Citibank was actually more at risk of losing money than Trump was. So it made more sense to them to find a way to manage the struggling airline and just let Trump off. All sides were close to an agreement on this by April of 1991. And in fact, Pan Am Shuttle was struggling too. That service was bought by Delta in July. But Northwest canceled its acquisition of the Trump Shuttle in August 1991 because of the unions. The unions in Trump Shuttle wanted what was called parity with Northwest employees. Basically, they wanted to be treated the same and paid the same amount, which, to be fair, was kind of reasonable. And Northwest would do this, but Trump refused to discount the price of the airline in order to reflect those extra fees in paying employees. So Northwest bowed out, and US Air reached an agreement to take it in December of 1991, signing a deal that would have them keep operational control of the shuttle for up to 10 years, with the option to buy it after 5. In exchange, Trump was relieved of at least $100 million of his personal guarantee, leaving him owing about $25 to $35 million, and closing out his ownership of the company. On April 7th, 1992, Trump Shuttle ceased to exist as a thing. It was merged into a new corporation, Shuttle Inc., which was operated as the US Air Shuttle on April 12th, 1992. US Airways did actually purchase it after 5 years, on November 19th, 1997, and the service's name was changed to US Airways Shuttle. The service is actually still around now, though in October 2015, US Airways and American Airlines merged, and now the shuttle is known as American Airlines Shuttle. Often Trump's foray into running an airline is painted as him being a terrible businessman, but it's just not the kind of business he's good at, I think is more the issue, to be completely fair about this. Any kind of travel service takes a particular touch to understand what goes into actually running it. It's not like running a hotel and casino. It has completely different fees, it has completely different regulations, and it has completely different expectations from the consumer. Flying on a plane is already pretty expensive, and operating in a plane is already pretty expensive. And the truth was, when it came to a short commuter service, people didn't want something ritzy and fancy. Yeah, it's nice. They were just looking to get where they were going. If the shuttle service had operated that way, it might have done a lot better. But Trump is, well, Trump. And he likes his Ritz. That's what he went with, and it just didn't work out. And with that, a special thank you goes to all my underwater train finders. Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Royal Hudson 2860, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsun 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Aurora Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Dr. Racer 78, Ohio Trucker 1, Lord Hoth 444, Alaric Jaspers, The Baxter, That Guy with a Beard, Mark Holding, Mercenary Revy, Lock Kraken, Crystal Morgan, A Person 723, and DM Tribal Typhoon. Till next time, this is Darkness, a visual of Fawn, farewell.